Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video. Welcome back to the channel. Today I am really excited because I bring you a brand new tier list, this time about the beautiful, super talented, and super gifted Icelandic singer, producer, arranger, composer, Bjork. This is by far the longest tier list I've made on this channel, so I'm pretty sure this video is going to be quite long, so make sure you have something to drink, make sure you have some popcorn or some chips, and because we have 10 albums to go through, yeah, 10, that means that I'm not going to be counting the sugar cubes or kukul, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. We're starting it off at debut in 1993, and we're letting it off at Fossora in 2022. But before we get into the actual video, let me remind you guys that this is only my personal opinion, so if you have your own, go ahead and leave it down below in the comments so I can make sure to check it out. Now, with that being said, let's not delay this any further. Let's go on with the first album. Even though that's literally the name of the record, this can hardly be called a debut because Björk had released multiple records with the Sugar Cubes and the other Icelandic band that I'm not even going to try to name because I know I'm going to pronounce it wrong. However, this album is very different from everything that Björk was doing with the Sugar Cubes, being more dance-oriented instrumentations that pretty much set the basis for Björk's style of performance, which is known to have a very precise delivery. I believe this to be one of the most solid set of songs that Björk ever crafted. From start to finish, the album is really entertaining. There's not a dull moment. We have songs like Human Behavior and Big Time Sensuality being some of her best pop songs, but you also have Venus as a Boy, which kind of hinted towards the hyperballadry that Björk would go on to do in albums like Posts and Homogenic. You even have a beautiful interpretation of the jazz standard like Someone in Love, which is one of my favorite songs in the album. Overall, you know, her performance feels so urgent, and in it you can find beauty and vulnerability. It's like this album has all the right ingredients to be a masterpiece. However, I think that Björk tried to cover a lot of different things with this record and didn't manage to focus on any of them, which is a problem she would go on to have on future albums, especially most recent releases. And that kind of brings the album back a little because, again, even though the track list is really solid and you can't find a single filler track or a single song that is not as good as the others, I think that it feels a little bit all over the place, which is a reason why I'm not going to put this album in the S tier. However, it is definitely an A tier, and it's an album that is as enjoyable as some of Björk's best records. And actually, one of those albums is the one we're talking about next because we're talking about Post, released in 1995. Björk's most popular album by far. The album cover for this album is one of my favorite album covers ever, and you know, Post overall is just the perfect example of what a second album should be. This album is such a massive evolution from debut because Björk again tries a lot of different genres. She doesn't focus on a specific type of songwriting. Actually, every single song in here feels completely different from the previous one and the next one, but she manages to connect all of these different tracks in one cohesive listen that is super tight and is super enjoyable. Actually, one of Björk's most enjoyable albums. You have some of her best songs like Army of One. The intensity of the drums in this track is amazing. The way that she sounds so menacing with the echoed vocals that feel like they're coming out of a radio. Then you have Hyper Ballad, which again hints towards the hyperballadry and the kind of ethereal type of music that she would go on to do on records like Homogenic and Vespertine. You also have the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful interpretation of the jazz standard. It's also quiet. It's beautiful, but also fun, entertaining, dynamic. The way that she screams and goes crazy at the chorus, you know, it works so well with her style of performing. This album also adds a new face to Björk's music, more meditational and mysterious with songs like Cover Me and Headphones. She would go on to develop this even more with records like Vespertine and Medúlla. And if you ask me, I think that this album is the perfect balance between, you know, the cutting edge music that Björk was trying to do at the time and the radio friendly cuts that she had in debut. So for that reason, it's going straight into the S tier, one of Björk's best albums. And actually, if you were to be like entry level fan, I'm pretty sure you would find this to be her best album. However, Björk went on to perfect the hyperballadry and futuristic sounds in the album Homogenic, released in 1997. Instrumentally, this is by far Björk's most impressive album. You know, the sculpting synths, the distorted sounds in the background, the way that she has a different style of performance in every single one of the songs, the skipping beats, the rhythmic drums, everything about this album feels so futuristic. You also have some of the best songs that she has to offer in tracks like Hunter, Unravel, Joga. You know, again, like she managed to perfect the hyperballadry and the meditational cuts in this album. You also have one of her best songs, one of her best crafted tracks with Bachelorette. The intensity, the beauty, the epic nature of the track, the way the track builds up to highs that I don't think you can find in any other of her songs. It's an amazing track, and it serves as an example of the level of quality that this album has to offer. You know, the overwhelming intensity of these tracks with the human beauty of Björk's vocals make this one of her best albums, and a clear S tier. I don't even have to think about it. However, even though a lot of people believe Homogenic to be Björk's best album, I have to slightly disagree because in my opinion, Vespertine, released in 2001, is her best record by far. This album kind of belongs in a parallel universe. You know, after Homogenic, people were waiting for Björk to do something even more cutting edge, even more intense, even more distorted, but instead she crafted one of the most beautiful albums ever made. From the very first track on the record, Hidden Place, which is one of her best songs, the strings, the synths, everything about this track is so beautiful and so mysterious, but also sexy. You know, you also have Cocoon, which is one of the most vulnerable songs that Björk had to offer at this point in her career. You have It's Not Up to You, Pagan Poetry, the beauty of the vocal harmonies in Aurora. While you still have a lot of layers in this record, it's not half as much as the one in Homogenic, but instead of feeling empty, it feels simple and natural. And you know, there's this meditational beauty in this record that make me feel like I'm not even listening to a human, but a goddess who came down from the heavens to craft one of the most beautiful pieces of music, if not the most beautiful piece of music ever made. And for that reason alone, we're gonna put this in the S tier as Björk's best album by far. Now we go to Medúlla, released in 2004. Now this is where the things start to get a little complicated, because up until this point, Björk didn't have a single miss. Every single album was amazing. Medúlla, on the other hand, is an album that divided the fan base, and even today there's a lot of people who argue this is her worst album, and there's a lot of people who argue that this album is as good as, you know, the 90s material that she was releasing with albums like Homogenic, Post, and Debut. The main reason why people are so divided with this album is that it really has no instrumentation. It's just Björk with vocals. There's a lot of beatboxing in this record, a lot of choirs here and there, and it makes the instrumentation feel a little bit empty. In my opinion, this is not Björk's most interesting album. However, I wouldn't really call this Björk's worst album. In my opinion, it's like in the middle in terms of quality, because a lot of these cuts are really, really beautiful. For example, songs like Eugenia and The Tired Constellation are some of the most beautiful songs Björk has ever crafted. And honestly, even though this album doesn't reach the same heights as the previous 4 records, I think it's a special album because of how unique it is. It's a really complicated album in terms of instrumentation, because again, it can feel a little empty, it can feel a little underdeveloped. However, it's in its simplicity and its minimalistic nature that it shines the most. However, it falls on the B tier because, again, the instrumentation here is very thin and simple, which makes the album beautiful. You know, it's a really beautiful record, but it's not as interesting as other albums. Plus, she tried to do this sort of minimalistic instrumentation again in future albums, and it was way better than this one, so I'm going to put this on the B tier. Now we go with Volta. This is probably the Björk album I've listened to the least because it's a mess. Honestly, I know that a lot of people seem to believe that this album isn't as bad as many people say it is. A lot of people seem to believe that this record explored a lot of different concepts that she went on to perfect in records like Fossora and Vulnicura. However, I believe that this is the most inconsequential album that Björk has to offer. There's nothing here that I find interesting, and even in the highlights of the record, like the Declare Independence, where the politically charged lyrics can be interesting at times, after multiple listens, it's kind of annoying. You do have some beautiful cuts in this album. For example, the track I See Who You Are. In my opinion, the strings, the harp is really beautiful. It matches Björk's energy. Obviously, the performance on this record is amazing. Björk never misses when it comes to vocal performance. However, the instrumentation is all over the place. I think she was trying to replicate the intensity of albums like Homogenic and Post, but completely failed. The result is an album that tries to do a lot of things at the same time and ends up doing absolutely nothing, so I'm going to put it in the D tier. I was thinking about putting it in the C tier because this album is not really as bad as I'm making it out to be, but especially when I compare it to the rest of her discography, this is just such a bloated record. So I think, it's fair to say it goes in the D tier. However, Bjork would have an incredible return to shape with the next album, Biophilia, released in 2011. This is the first app album because it was released alongside an app that showed different visuals and different compositional compliments to the record that go really well with it. If you have the chance and you're willing to spend $12, I think it's worth on the App Store. I definitely recommend for you to check it out. This idea of pairing music with different concepts in nature, I think it's really interesting. Even if she didn't really made an effort to go deep into this concept, I think that even if only explored on the surface, it still matches the musical energy of the album. The instrumentation is incredibly minimalistic compared to her other compositions, but not as minimalistic as the one in Medúlla, which is basically just vocals. You do have harps, strings in this album, some synths here and there, nature sounds, and it all allows Björk's voice, vocals, and melodies to shine through. And the album does have some intense moments like the track Mutual Core, where you can find this distorted synths and fast-paced rhythms. However, you can find the highlights of the record to be the more spiritual and meditational cuts like Dark Matter, Moon, or Cosmogony, which are arguably the best songs on the record and some of Björk's best compositions. This is a really beautiful album. For that reason, I'm going to put it in the A tier, and depending on the day, I may even put this album in the S tier because I really do think this album is that good. After Biophilia, Björk would go on a roller coaster of emotions deeply rooted in heartbreak and loss, which would result in the album Vulnicura, released in 2015. Now, this is arguably one of the most intense Björk albums when it comes to performance. Actually, when it comes to vocal skill and vocal performance alone, this has to be one of my favorite releases from Björk. But the instrumentation isn't all that great. It tries to capture the same essence as, the hyperballadry of Post and Homogenic, but it doesn't really reach the same height. There are some exceptions, like the track Atom Dance and Stone Milker, which are excellent songs, among the best releases from Björk, actually, but they're packed in between this set of songs that, even though they fulfill their purpose when it comes to the narrative, I feel like the instrumentation is so weird, and, it has this awkwardly placed string arrangements and laser sounds and all these little digital sounds that don't really do anything for the tracks, especially when we're talking about a heartbreak album, that I feel like it lowers the quality of the tracks and the album overall to the point where it's not as good as what it attempted to be. While I do enjoy a fair amount of the tracks in this record, I can't really put it at the same level of albums like Biophilia or Debut. That's the reason why I'm going to put this album in the B tier. Definitely don't skip this album. This is a really important album when it comes to Björk's canon because it sees her focusing on one particular event and, the aftermath of that event, which is heartbreak and, the loss of someone you love. And that, I believe, it's really interesting, especially because she never tackled this feelings in such a precise and deep way as she did on this album. So definitely a really important listen, but not one of her best. However, with each heartbreak comes the opportunity to love again, and that's exactly what Utopia is. In terms of instrumentation, Utopia has to be one of the most relaxing and meditational albums that Björk has ever released, along with Vespertine, Medúlla, and Biophilia. This album is incredibly beautiful. I believe that the contrast between the intensity of Vulnicura and the peacefulness of Utopia is amazing and is one of the best things that the last decade had to offer. However, in this relaxing and meditational cuts, you do find a little bit of boredom because this is a 72-minute album. It's quite a long album, especially if you consider this is mostly ambient music, flutes, and nature sounds. Björk's vocals are beautiful in this record, but they're not like the main attraction. I can listen to this album when I go out for a walk at night. If I'm trying to sleep, it's definitely a great album. It's sort of like an Ichiko Aoba experience of sorts. But for the most part, I feel like the record fails to entertain you for the entirety of the 72 minutes. Even though it's a beautiful album, it's really beautifully written, and I think it's even more interesting and enjoyable than that of Vulnicura, which I know it's kind of a controversial thing to say. I personally find myself enjoying this album a little bit more than Vulnicura, even though I can admit that they're both in kind of like the same level of quality. Highlighting some of the songs here, it's kind of useless because this is a more, this is like a 72-minute song instead of separate tracks. I feel like that's a proper way to listen to this album, but personally, the tracks Blessing Me and Saint are the most beautiful cuts here. The choirs, the vocal harmonies, the beautiful nature sounds, birds, and everything in the background offers such an atmospheric experience that I think it's a really important album in Björk's discography because it's unique. Björk never did something like this. I think the closest thing we had to something like this was Biophilia, and still it didn't feel as natural and as ethereal as Utopia. And for that reason, I'm going to put this album in the B tier. A little bit boring at times, but overall it's a really good album, which leads me to the last album we're talking about today, which is Fossora, released in 2022, the most recent album by Björk. And honestly, I think this is an amazing album. I think this is a step in the right direction for Björk. I believe that in this album, she tried to look back and, used every tool she has on her arsenal. You find the intensity of albums like Homogenic and Post in tracks like Atomos, for example, with those loud drums, those reggaeton-inspired rhythms. But this album also has the natural minimalistic beauty of records like Vespertine and Biophilia. Her performance in this album is way more theatrical, and loud and intense, which makes every single song on this album feel like a movie. Overall, I think this is a really good album, a really solid track list with songs like the title track being amazing, Ancestress is incredible, Fungal City, with the flutes and the drums, I love it, and obviously the opener Atomos is a personal favorite of mine on this album, even if the drums and the flutes at the end don't really mix that well. The beginning, the first part of the track is incredible, it feels revolutionary of sorts. I love the lyrics, I love what it's trying to say, how we're all part of the same human race. I love that song. But the main problem I have with this album, and the reason why I'm not putting it in the S tier, is because in this attempt to take everything that we loved about other albums and putting it into one record, I think she sacrificed a lot of the focus that the album should have had. I think that the album sounds a little bit all over the place, and it sacrifices a lot of the album's cohesiveness. At the end of the day, you can find connections in the album based on the flutes and the drums and maybe the theatrical performances, but when you look at the album as a whole and you look every track individually, there's not a lot that connects any of them, except for, again, a few things in the instrumentation and in Björk's performance. But the album doesn't feel as tight and as connected as albums like Vespertine or Homogenic, and in my opinion that kind of hurts the album a little, which is the reason why I'm putting it in the A tier. But this is a really solid track list, and it's definitely a step in the right direction for Björk after the Vulnicura and Utopia thing. Even though they're good albums, I think it's obvious that it was a low in terms of quality in her career, and seeing her go back to an amazing shape with Fossora leaves me excited and anticipating her next release. Let's hope it's soon. Let's hope it happens soon. That is the last album we're talking about today. Now let's take a minute to appreciate the fact that there's only one album in the D tier, and then every other album is in the upper part of the list. That goes to show how much of an amazing artist Björk is. And believe me, I'm critical. I'm a critical guy. You can see that in the Radiohead tier list. You can see that in the Coldplay tier list. You can see that in every other tier list I've made. I'm not someone that gives high ratings just because I'm really critical when it comes to music, and especially Björk, because she's someone I hold really high in terms of what an artist is and how high an artist can go when it comes to quality. So the fact that almost every single album is in the A tier or S tier goes to show how much of an amazing artist she is, and how much of a legend she is. I'm really excited for her to release another album. That'll be it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the videos that I upload. This was a really long video. It's almost 45 minutes on the clock right now. I don't know how long this video is going to be once I edit all and cut all the parts out, but this is probably one of the longest videos that I'm going to have on my channel, so I really hope that you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you like this sort of long videos, or if you'd rather my videos to be on the 10-15 minute mark like they usually are. Also, let me know what you guys think about my list. If you disagree, let me know. If you agree, let me know as well. I'm really excited to see which albums you put in which tier. You can take a screenshot of your own tier list and send it through my Instagram. I'm going to put it down below here in the description and also in the screen somewhere. So yeah, once again, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you guys soon with a new video. But until then, bye.